Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And joining us again today is Sister Helen Prejean to talk a little more about her latest book, The Death of Innocence, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions, published by Random House. Now let's outline what we have here. We have a book that focuses on two men who were wrongfully executed.
Whom I accompanied to execution.
Whom you accompanied. One, Dobie Gillis Williams, who also had an IQ that, by current situation, he would never have been executed.
Atkins decision of the Supreme Court, if you have an IQ under 70, his was 65, you couldn't be executed. But that happened 2 years after he was executed.
The second case is one Joseph Odell. And
Virginia.
This is in Virginia. His lawyer situation was so bad, he decided to defend himself.
Defended himself. And every court in the land did not find that was ineffectiveness of counsel or that his constitutional right to adequate defense had been violated.
And as you learn from reading this book, the amount of evidence that shows how totally without guilt Joseph Odell is, it'll really, really get you angry, and that's good.
No, and it's so hard. It's going to be hard on the reader because as you go through the stories, and then vicariously people will go through the execution because I take you there with me. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard to see the death of a person. I mean, arguably, honorable people might have disagreements of whether or not you ought to execute somebody who's done a real terrible crime and emotions get in and all that. But boy, when you see this and you go through this, and it's very difficult, and it's going to be hard on the reader too. But anger, because the only way we're going to change the death penalty is if people go, this is outrageous, this cannot happen in the United States of America, and we have to do something about it.
This is totally barbaric. Now, one of the people who's come around to this is Pope John?
Paul II. Well,
Paul II.
Well, the whole Catholic Church has been on a journey. I mean, there's been a lot of dialogue. My image of dialogue is not just one great big fat bubble that comes up in a pot when a pot is boiling. There are a lot of little bubbles that start coming out all over the place.
All right.
So Catholic bishops have been issuing statements.
No, wait a minute. One of the bigger bubbles in this whole story is you. I'm
a part of it.
And a letter that you wrote to the Pope.
All right. I want
to tell them about that.
Yes, I acknowledge I am a bubble. I am a bubble. All right, I have my hand over my heart as I am saying this.
Definitely, and you wrote a letter.
And I do want to talk about what happened between me and the Pope, and Joseph Odell is the one who became the occasion. Now, that man is dead. He has been killed. This is at the cost of his life that this dialogue happened. But Italy, and even just to back up a little bit, a young woman by the name of Lauriers volunteers with Centurion Ministries in Princeton, New Jersey, to take cases of people who claim to be innocent. She hooks up with Joe Odell. So she calls me, asks me to help. I get involved with Joseph Odell. As she's fighting for his life, as she begins to realize these things and tries to prove them, Italy gets involved, which means the Pope hears about it. So the Pope gets involved. Mother Teresa gets involved. Now, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, everybody images as this pious, hands folded, and she works with the poor. And that is all true.
Yes.
But she had a moment with Governor George Allen in Virginia over the phone where she let him have a piece of her holy mind about the death penalty and what he was doing as governor. And then because of Lauriers is going to be brought over to Italy by the members of the Italian Parliament, I get a phone call like this from her. Sister Helen, you're not going to believe this, but the Italian Parliament is bringing me over, and I might have a chance to see the Pope. You could come. You could meet the Pope, because, aren't popes and nuns, tight? And I go...
That's one of the greatest lines.
No, in a great. I mean, and
she was popes and nuns tight.
Tight, yeah. So anyway, and don't you want to talk to the Pope about the death penalty? Well, did I want to talk to the Pope about 14 years I'd been working on the death penalty, and we had a Catholic archbishop who was taking the opposite side in Louisiana, saying the death penalty was fine. So I wrote a letter. I couldn't go to Italy because I had a friend dying of breast cancer at the time.
Yes.
But my letter was delivered right to the Pope, and it went right into his lap. And a friend of mine in the Vatican said he read every word of your letter. Basically, I said, Your Holiness, we need the Catholic Church to take a principled opposition to the death penalty in every case, and because to uphold the dignity, the inviolable dignity of the human person, not just the innocent, but even the guilty. And that's what the core of the letters in the book, and that's what it was about.
We will find out what happened in the Catholic Church throughout the world, somewhat as a result of this letter dropped in his lap, and every word of which he read very carefully. You won't want to miss it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Sister Helen Prejean is the guest today on Conversations on the Coast, and on those words alone, you should stay tuned. The book is The Death of Innocence, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions about which the auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Detroit, one Thomas J. Gumbleton, says, quote, "Once more, Sister Helen enables us to connect on a deeply human level with those on death row." This deeply human level, as Sister's descriptions of the last moments of these two men, I guarantee you, will make you weep. The death of innocence, in the death of innocence, she also explains the seismic change in Catholic teaching on the death penalty. Following Pope John Paul's lead, Catholics everywhere now work for the abolition of this evil. Now, we were actually talking in the last segment about the very beginning of this seismic change, the letter dropped in the Pope's lap, and then what happens next?
Yeah, it's not the beginning of the seismic change that was coming, but the core of it was, the traditional teaching of the Catholic Church has been the state has a right to take life in order to defend society. The Church's teaching has never been this punitive thing of an eye for an eye, pain for pain, life for life, but to protect society for grave or grievous crimes. It's like a tripod. The Pope...
So that it was supposed to be an exceptional occurrence.
Well, the Pope, in his encyclical, The Gospel of Life, had pushed the death penalty to the edge and had taken one of the principles, because societies have a way to defend themselves through prisons, that you don't have to resort to the death penalty. Said it should be rare, if not non-existent. Mm-hmm. But that's not principled opposition. He allowed, though, in the encyclical, but in cases of absolute necessity, the state could execute. And that was the core of what I was saying to him. Your Holiness, if you say in cases of absolute necessity, anytime the state executes, they're going to claim it's an absolute necessity. And providentially, the DA, District Attorney in New Orleans, good Catholic, Harry Connick Sr., whose son plays the pretty music. Yeah. And here's the daddy going after the death penalty. And he said, we can't get enough death penalties in New Orleans, in Orleans Parish. And he said, so everyone we do is an absolute necessity. And so I said to the Holy Father, we have to, what's the principled opposition? We can't allow exceptions. And my letter was delivered to the Pope on January 22nd. On January 29th, Cardinal Ratzinger made this announcement that the Catechism, the definitive edition, was going to be changed because the death penalty section was being changed. The change was they took the criteria for grave or grievous crimes, which had been operative in the Church for 1,700 years, and cut it out of the Catechism. That is no longer the criterion for determining when people give the death penalty. In other words, no matter how grave, no matter how grievous the crime, a room full of people killed, 3 people killed, 14 people killed, 1 person killed, no matter how grave or grievous, Osama bin Laden killing people, anybody killing people, because societies have a way that is nonviolent, that is what must be used. So by cutting out that criteria, they have changed the whole thing. So in other words, we can say that at this point, the Catholic Church has a principled position against the death penalty and cannot give any instance in which it is allowed. confusion comes that people quote from the encyclical, and the confusion comes because what changed in the catechism is an omission, and you don't see an omission, so it has to be brought out. But I'm sending the book to every one of the Catholic bishops, and also with a cover letter and a guest editorial for the diocesan newspapers, because we got to get this out to the people in the pews.
You're darn right. You're darn right.
Yeah.
So that's what the seismic change.
That's it.
Of which he speaks.
And the Pope himself took leadership in it, and people told me that. And notice he came to St. Louis in 99. He had been to the United States 4 other times, never mentioned the death penalty. And what happened, 99, the change in the catechism happened in 97. He stands up in St. Louis and he says, no to abortion, no to euthanasia, no to physician-assisted suicide, and for the first time positions the death penalty, and no to the death penalty, which is cruel and unnecessary. Even those guilty of heinous or terrible crimes have a dignity that must not be taken from them.
You must sit down at night when you think about that story that you just told and say, hey, at a certain level, it's all been worth it.
Well, you know, I have the memory of Dobie dying, Joseph dying, 6 people dying, and all I know is that we have to press on with this, and we have to awaken people so that we can choose an alternative of life in this country instead of death. It just feeds the passion.
Joseph's story has all kinds of ins and outs to it. It involves a lot of different people. In addition to the Pope, it involves
amazing. The mayor of Palermo,
who
comes and makes him an honorary citizen of Palermo.
Yeah. And also a wedding. And we're going to talk about some of these strange goings-on when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Conversations on the Coast. Jim Foster here. Sad news. This is our last segment with Sister Helen Prejean, and she's talking about the new book, The Death of Innocence, an eyewitness account of wrongful execution. She's also talking about being up close and personal with the Pope. And this book has it all when it comes to endorsements. I mean, it's got bishops, it's got outstanding lawyers, and it has movie stars like Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon, who say, among other things, in Dead Man Walking, notice we get in the other titles, good for Random House selling purposes, Sister Helen Prejean helped us face the question of whether it is morally right for governments to kill the guilty. In The Death of Innocence, she ups the ante of moral reckoning. In a hopelessly flawed system of justice, what if we're killing innocent people along with the guilty? This important and well-written book is a deeply personal, compassionate, serially honest eyewitness account of the death penalty in America. If you are not outraged by the sheer inhumanity and unfairness of state-sanctioned killing after reading this book, it might be time for you to run for governor of Texas. Hard-hitting.
Yeah, right.
Hard-hitting.
There's stories of Governor George W. Bush presiding over 152 executions in Texas, and Alberta Gonzales, his legal counsel, that helped him do the pro forma exercise.
The new Attorney General.
Yes.
Oh. Well, I want to stay on the legal level here, and I want you to talk about duck hunting and your brother.
On the legal level, we are now talking about duck hunting.
Yes.
I'm sure every listener is making the connection.
Well, they're making notes.
My brother Louis goes duck hunting with Justice Scalia. And Justice Scalia is one
And you still talk to him?
Oh, yeah. No, I love Louis. And Louis, Louis
has
sweet
lots
guy.
of other good qualities.
No, and when Louis tells me that he's going duck hunting with Justice Scalia, whom he calls Nino, and he says, I'll fix up good stuff for him, sis. I'll do, jambalaya and gumbo and all that. I said, Louis, do you know who he is? He's one of the justices on the court that almost always upholds these death sentences that are getting people killed that I'm accompanying to execution. And he goes, well, sis, he says, we don't talk about all that court stuff. We just hunt. And so anyway, there's Louis, and he's documenting with Justice Scalia. And here I am working on this book, and the second half of this book is taking on the constitutional questions and also religion, Christianity, because Justice Scalia at a conference in 2002 in Chicago laid out his thought, which I found appalling. His theology, he quotes straight out of Romans 13, governments are appointed by God, who obviously is a God of wrath, to execute the sword of wrath on evildoers. Any fundamentalist preacher in Alabama, same theology. And he makes outrageous statements like the more Christian a government is, the more it executes, because it's appointed by God to do this. And the reason Europe doesn't execute is because they're post-Christian. They follow Freud. We follow Jesus. We execute. And then he does his fancy footwork. Oh, well, individual Christians now have to forgive. We can't go around killing people. But the government, because it's anointed by God. And then he said, democracy's messy. In the good old days, when the kings fought battles with the Lord of hosts behind them, which is the God of war.
That's right.
Then they're clearly anointed by God. These democracies are messy. Anyway, this Justice Scalia, I'm taking on in the second half of the book of the constitutional arguments as well. And I'm coming from Georgetown on a Sunday night, and I arrive back in the New Orleans airport. It's the end of a weekend of duck hunting, obviously. And who is standing right there? Concourse A, Gate 7, fiddling with the headphones of his portable CD player? Himself. And I walked up to him. I was so surprised I didn't even use his title. And I said, are you Scalia? And he has a really good sense of humor. And he fiddle. He's going, well, somebody's got to be fiddle, you know. I said, Justice Scalia, I'm Sister Helen Prejean. I'm Louis' sister. And he goes, oh, Louis is a fine guy. I said, yeah, I know he is. And I said, you get any ducks? He said, no, not a one flying. And I said, Justice Scalia, I'm writing a book about two men, Dobie Williams and Joseph Odell, that were executed. I believe they were innocent. Yours was a decisive vote in their deaths. I know what you said at the conference in Chicago. I've been studying it very carefully, and I just want to let you know, I mean, big threat, right? I'm taking you on in this book. And he said, he jabs his finger in the air and says, I'll be right back at you. But really, I'm not taking him on. It's to bring it to the American people.
Yeah.
What does our Constitution say? What are all the flaws in this system so people can get a hold of it so that we can change this thing?
We've been talking to Sister Helen Prejean for 2 consecutive programs, and it's been some of the best interviewing we've ever done. We just stand here and let it go. But today we've been talking about the death of innocents, an eyewitness account of wrongful executions with Sister Helen Prejean. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.